All right, guys, we are back for our weekly Q&A. I'm here with Brandon this week. Hopefully we'll have Chad or Ben next week, but so I check in. How are you doing, Brandon?
Knock on rocks, man. I'm having quite a nice day. I got a pack today that I've been trying to get for years. It's the Karma's Sour Diesel Back Cross, and it's been floating around. And yeah, I think everybody's been noticing weird stuff with USPS lately, just being slow and whatever. And it's been floating around for about 3 weeks in limbo, and it finally showed up today. So I'm ecstatic.
So what is it that makes these genetics like so special?
So I'm like a lot of people. I'm a sour diesel chem gas fanatic. That's the stuff I like. Um, this sour diesel is high. Karma's version or back cross is widely recognized as one of the best options out there for folks um, who are trying to chase that cut and you can't get it. So yeah. So I'm just super excited, super excited.
Right on. Well,
Can't tell me
congratulations.
anything today, man. Yeah, I'm super pumped.
Well, good. Well, is there anything you want to talk about before we dive into questions?
Um, no, I had a really good time with Chad Westport on the seed collectors. Speaking of seeds, the seed collector dropped 2 weeks ago on Saturday on his channel. That was really fun. I think that we just released this week that KiS will be working with Collective Elevation in September 5, 6, and 7 in Montana for the conference. So that's really exciting to see, that progressing. I don't know if you want
Yep.
to say anything about that.
Sure. Yeah. And we'll get into these questions. I'm seeing some pop up and I have some from last time. But yeah, so we're hosting a conference at Collective Elevation, which you can see the tour on our YouTube page. You can kind of get it. It's phenomenal place. They have the coolest mother room I've ever seen in a facility. And they're just great guys and really good growers. I mean, if you can grow in Montana when you get down into negative temperatures and also over 100, like you have to know your stuff. So I'm excited for that. And we've got, I'm trying to get all the aspects of cultivation kind of covered in the conference because I get to kind of control the speakers and stuff. And so we have Dr. Greenhouse, Dr. Nadia Saba, who's really like the best when it comes to airflow and environmental controls for any grow room or grow space for growing plants. So she's going to give a talk and a workshop. And then I have the bug lady, Suzanne Wainwright Evans, good friend of mine. She's going to be coming out and also doing a workshop and a talk. I'm talking with BioBee about being out there on the insect side. Dram is going to come out and answer all our water irrigation questions, all things water. They're phenomenal. And yeah, waiting for a couple of confirmations from I think the Blue Mat guys want to head out. The Grassroot Pots guys will be there. I think we have about 200 to 250 ticket spots. And then, so the first 2 days are the conference. The third day is going to be a tasting event hosted by the Montana Living Soil Alliance group, and they're going to donate the weed. People can come out, try all these different living soil, grown cultivars, and just hang out for an event on Sunday. That's part of the ticket. So that should be fun.
Yeah,
Really
that's
looking
awesome.
forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
hope they bring enough weed. Tell them I'm coming.
yeah, I think they're going to invite a bunch of the local bud tenders too, so they can kind of educate them on what the nuances are. And I don't know, we're figuring it out, but it's definitely happening. I talked to them on Friday, and they committed to the event. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Um, Yeah. All right. Well, and then if you haven't had a chance, you can check out Chad Westport just dropped a video on his channel, growing in the Twin Peaks custom soil blend from KiS. And so you can see he's all the way through veg now, 7-gallon pots. So you can see what kind of living soil you can do in smaller containers. And he does a really good job explaining that. And yeah, let's get into some questions. I guess we'll start with a light one here first. Brandon, are you getting into some of the sours?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm always chasing. I actually just got a buddy of mine. He's on Instagram as Genetically Superior. He just sent me a bunch of sour diesel crosses. Um, Another friend on Instagram, Aram, sent me some sour diesel, some AJ sour diesel crosses. I've got several like Kim D and sour diesel crosses I'm working with, and so yeah, I'm super excited. And this was, just one more thing I can throw into the mix there. So I'm super excited about it.
Do you know the lineage on the sours by chance?
So it depends. Are we talking? I'm assuming we're talking sour diesel, not sourdough. But I'm assuming we're talking sour diesel. Um, Sour diesel came from the famous Kim line, and it was some guys in the New York area who found a couple of seeds. It was bag seed. It's like the most prized bag seed on the planet, and they kept it in a very tight circle. And the diesel, they weren't really even describing the way I've heard it from AJ is that they weren't even describing the gas smell. They just called it diesel. Anything that was strong was diesel. Like, I don't know, in the South we would say somebody's cock diesel if they're really jacked up, big strong guy who's cock diesel. So diesel just means strong to those guys. And then the other thing that I've heard is that there was a bucket or something that said our diesel, and there was a 5 on the bucket, and somebody was like, hey, that sour diesel is, and so it was kind of like an inside joke with them. And so I think that AJ's been on a lot of podcasts and stuff now where he talks about the origins of it and that sort of thing. And it's one of those super famous stories, kind of deadhead mythology lore, but it's one of my all-time favorites.
Nice. All right. Well, let's get into the questions on actual cultivation here. First one is from Garage Grower. When to add nematodes to a grow? I can start this one off and just say I like to add them right at the beginning. Typically, when you bring in new fresh soil or starting a grow and you're bringing in, let's say, clones into your flower room, that's really when you have the potential to be bringing in fungus gnats or some sort of larva that could potentially be a cannabis pest. So that's where I like to add SF nematodes. That's really all I had, I guess. I don't know. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I just when to add nematodes. Yesterday, they're one of those things that I think should be in every organic garden, indoor at least. It does a lot for you to keep not just fungus gnats, but if thrips or aphids or anything else that pupates in the soil gets in your room, it can help with that. They're not hurt by Bovaria, so you can use Bovaria to take out targeted pests and still use the nematodes. And then the only thing I'd add to timing would be if you see all of a sudden that you have if you've got sticky cards, you're monitoring your room, and all of a sudden you see a big influx of, fungus gnats or something, you might want to do another application. I only find myself doing an application. I used to do it every round. I find myself doing an application kind of every other round and not having issues. But if you're in an area where you have high humidity and a lot of moisture, that's a great preventative for fungus gnats.
Yeah. So 2 rounds ago, I did SF nematodes because I had fairly new soil, and then I also did what else did I do? Simitus. I don't remember what you recommended at the time.
Yeah, some generalists. It might have been strats.
It might have been strats. Anyway, so I did those 2 as a release. And with the nematodes, you keep them in the fridge until you're ready, and then you want to let them warm up slowly to ambient temps, and then you can mix them with water. If you don't have a fancy nematode release bucket and you're just a small time grower, you can just mix them gently and then I put mine out through a watering can, but you can put them out through certain sprayers. But they're just make sure whenever you're applying beneficial insects, anything that's alive, that you watch a release video from a reputable company just to make sure that you know what you're doing so you don't damage them when you're putting them out. And there's ways to check the viability on them and things like that, but we don't need to get into all that.
If you're doing nematodes outside, there's a great video. I'll try to find it. Maybe we could put a link, but there's a great video of how to do it with a hose end sprayer with a mixer. And yeah, that's a really good one for folks that have to do it outside.
You could use them for fleas too, like flea larvae in your lawn and stuff. So they're really effective. This last round, I will say, I just did, instead of that, I did some mosquito bits because I had some on hand. And so I had one of my cleanest rounds ever. Like when you came out to help me harvest, there was nothing on the sticky cards. And they'd been up for almost a month. I've never seen that before. It was incredible.
Yeah. Spotless.
Yeah. So sometimes you get lucky too. Brandon, talk about your comfrey issues. I make FPJ with it on the regular. I need to know. Thanks, bro. Beach Lover 101.
Right on. So comfrey's phenomenal. And if you put me on a desert island, I would definitely want to have it. When I was in South Carolina, my fruit trees were all planted into really, really dense clay. And I put comfrey underneath all of them. And, you know, it's got a really great tap root. It's going to bring up, you know, especially trace minerals and stuff that plants might not have available. It can help with the aeration, you know, and heavy clay soils and that kind of stuff. The downside of it, one that I know drives Tad crazy, especially at his old farm, is that it's like a hydra. If you cut its head off, you're going to get 10 more. And so digging out comfrey, like wherever you're growing it, like it's there forever pretty much. It's really hard to kill. The reason that I don't like it and a reason that I would not make FPJ with it is because I don't like it. It's just a powdery mildew factory. It was the same way in South Carolina as it is here in Washington. It's just, you know, you can set your calendar by it. You're going to have an explosion of just like, you'll come out in the morning and everything's just white. And so I don't like it for that reason. And because it seems to, you know, it's got really, really low fiber. That's one of the great things about using it as a mulch outside or in your compost. It's going to break down super fast. But because of that super low fiber, it's really susceptible to fungal pathogens, and you could be accidentally loading up your spore pressure in your room. So that's my concern there.
My other concern with it is just that because it is such a dynamic accumulator, like hemp and cannabis, there is the potential for it to, anything that accumulates nutrients also accumulates heavy metals.
Yeah,
so
true.
Just something to think about. But that being said, like it is a pretty amazing plant. For me, the biggest issue is the lifetime commitment to where it goes, because I like sometimes I want to move a plant around, and if you dig in that area and you break off a 1/4 inch of root, well, now you have 2 comfrey plants there, and then it just starts to multiply. It's very successful. So
yeah. That's a great point about the heavy metals, though. It's going to accumulate whatever you've got outside.
All right, biochar. Yeah. So best applications is just to mix it into your soil. Honestly, it has a ton of different benefits. They are also using biochar for remediation, like government remediation projects around removal of heavy metals, removal of contaminants in the soil. It's pretty phenomenal. It's like, think of like charcoal on crack, I guess, in terms of its ability to remove things based on its surface area and pore structure. It's really phenomenal. If your biochar isn't inoculated, and let's say you're adding it to some soil, like if you were mixing soil for the first time, don't even worry about it. There's going to be enough nitrogen in there when you mix the soil that it's not going to be an issue. Now, if you have a plant that's already established and you want to add biochar to that plant, if it's a cannabis plant, I probably wouldn't do it. I just wait till your next cycle, and then when you go to mix the soil, you can mix the biochar in there. You just need to make sure that you're adding a little bit of nitrogen at the same time. So to inoculate the biochar, a little bit of nitrogen. That can be literally anything. It can be some some fish meal, some blood meal, some liquid grow formula. Urine honestly has enough nitrogen apparently for it, according to our manufacturer. So yeah, that's really the big thing with the biochar. But in general, when we mix soils, we were initially inoculating it with fish hydrolysate. And then our supplier said that the oil from the fish hydrolysate could actually be maybe potentially clogging or blocking some of the pore space in the biochar itself. And so that wasn't best practice. And so we just stopped inoculating it and did not see a difference. So I really believe that that's not important, an important step when you're mixing soil and you're adding a bunch of nutrients.
6 to 10%. Does that sound good?
Yeah, we're 3 to 8 in all of our soils. For field
for remediation,
field soil, 2%. Oh, got it. Yeah.
Yeah, my bad. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're mixing your own soil, even as low as 5%, you should see plant benefit from. So you don't need to go crazy with it because it is expensive. Oh, the conference. So we haven't released the pricing on it yet. I'll just tell you guys though, it's going to be $200 for a ticket. I know that's a little bit on the higher end. We're paying for some of these speakers to come in, and it's going to be an expensive conference to put on. But I think there's absolutely going to be value there over those 3 days. So yeah, that's how much the tickets are, just for people that are interested. And they'll go on sale next, I believe next Monday. What is that? March 10th on the KiS Organics site. So yeah, there's only going to be a couple hundred, I think, unless we can talk Collective into opening it up further. So if you are interested, I would say grab a ticket early. All right. If a batch of activated EM1 is sat for too long, will it be harmful? It no longer smells sweet and has an alcohol smell. Can this be useful in small amounts like hydrogen peroxide? Brandon, do you want to try and answer that? Or?
Yeah. So EM1, and just here's my personal take on EM1 is that the active ingredient for the most part is the lactobacillus. And so I just use lab and save myself a bunch of extra work and stuff. But EM1, it's a great KNF product for folks that might not be familiar with it. If it no longer smells sweet and has an alcohol smell to it, I would go ahead and get rid of it. Hydrogen peroxide and alcohol are two completely different animals. Both can be used to sterilize. One of them is an oxidizer, and peroxide loses its peroxicity really quickly. There's products like Sanidate, Xeritol that people can use, commercial level to clean things with, to deal with soil fungal pathogens. There's a lot of different things you can do. You do need to use proper PPE. You can really hurt yourself with some of these really strong peroxide products. I would, if it smells like alcohol, I would get rid of it. If you don't have a liver, alcohol will kill you. That's everything on this planet. Any living organism that doesn't have a liver, alcohol is going to kill it. And so that's why alcohol is really good, to sterilize things with. And in most cases, I wouldn't add it to my soil. You could definitely damage productive biology. You could definitely kill off some roots. So yeah, I would get rid of that.
Yeah, just as a general rule, if something smells bad, I probably wouldn't use it unless it's known to smell bad, like it's that particular type of a ferment.
Stuff oil X.
Yeah, but in general, we do want to make sure we're not applying alcohols into our garden, because those will absolutely cause phytotoxicity or necrosis or damage microbiology. So yes, I would avoid it too. All right.
And poisons in the dose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the last comment on that, I guess.
All right, we're kind of just going to go in order on these questions. I haven't really read them even yet, and I can't answer this, but maybe you can. What is the lowest ppm colloidal silver for reversal? He's got it down to 50 ppm, or are you using silver thiosulfate?
I use both colloidal silver and silver thiosulfate, and I have a friend who makes it, and he sends it to me, and I don't know what the ppms are, and I don't know what it costs, and it works. But I don't know if he's making this on a commercial scale or not. I know there's a lot of folks that do. I'll reach out to him, and if he is, I'll put some information on here.
Okay.
But I apologize. I just, this is not something that I'm an expert on at all, and I don't know what.
I think that's okay for us to say too. We're not going to have all the answers. Yeah. So if we don't know, we'll tell you. All right, little nugs. Would you be worried if you were 4 to 5 weeks of flower and when lights out, your RH spikes to 64% humidity and 60 degrees Fahrenheit? Yeah. Yeah, I'd be worried. In fact, funny story, recently in this last round, I absolutely had, I think I beat you. I was something like 86%, 70 or 80% humidity and like 65 Fahrenheit. My humidity was way higher than my temperature. And because we'd lose power, and then that room would just sit there and get really cold really fast in the garage, and the humidity would just go through the roof. So yeah, it's a concern. What can you really
60? I wouldn't be too worried at 60, but 65 lights out. You know, you want to think about dew point and where that's you know, so that's why that VPD chart's so important. If you're hitting dew point in your room, you're potentially setting yourself up for fungal pathogen. You had an incredibly dense morphology to your buds, and I think you only lost 2 buds out of the whole harvest though. So it doesn't mean you're going to lose the whole room. You know, there are things, if you see fungal pathogens pop up, you definitely want to cut that. That's another spot where you could take like I have, friends that are hill growers, and they would take like the injector, the big syringes that you inject a turkey with. They'd fill it up with Sanidate. Don't get it on your hands, but they'd hit that little spot. Again, peroxicity goes away almost immediately. It's not going to hurt an end user. It's just basically oxygen. It's gone. But that will stop its spread in that area. And then, contrary to powdery mildew, where you want high airflow, if you've got Fusarium botrytis showing up in your room, cut your fans. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but additional airflow, you're just spreading those spores all over your room. Because what works with PM is because it needs a dry room to actually sporulate, and then it needs a wet room to live in. And so that's how it's able to beat that. And then, so, with Fusarium or botrytis, you want to turn the fans off.
If you can't control temperature, so let's say of the dials that you can control, if temperature is not one of them, then I would I would try and control humidity, or vice versa. So you want to adjust to what you have to adjust to. So let's say you can't make it any warmer in that room than 60, then I would want to drop my humidity as low as possible to get down into what would be a somewhat closer VPD range. If you have to keep your humidity at 64, then I would get my temperatures up as a way of sort of accounting for that, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's a really tough one. If it happens just one night for a few hours, you're probably going to be okay. But as you get further into flower, as your plants become more susceptible. So like for me, I had it happen the day before I chopped. So I was like, I'm done. And we spotted 2 buds that had botrytis, and it's like, okay, I'm done growing this round. Like there's no point in trying to do this any longer. It's just going to get worse, because once you see it, that means you have spores in the room, and there's a lot more out there. And so it's just best to either decide to harvest then, or to throw it out, because you really can't, there's no great ways to extend your growing cycle at that point once you have heavy spore pressure, because you can't really spray anything at that point. You're kind of stuck. So It's a tough situation. I feel for you on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the alkalinity question. So I can't really comment on the build a soil way because it's a little different than ours in the sense that, you know, we try to use as few inputs as possible because it gets expensive. What I would say though, in terms of your water, because this applies to all water, and I know Jeremy has a slightly different take on this. I think the way he explains it is a little bit confusing. So he says that pH doesn't matter in your water because it doesn't impact your soil pH. And at the end of the day, you can just water with it. But then he also adds at some point, he'll say just kind of quickly that unless your water is really bad. So here's the thing. The way you need to look at this is like, it doesn't matter what the pH of your water is. It matters what the alkalinity of your water is. That's the ability of the water to be buffered. So if let's say you have water that has very low ppms in it, you know, you got RO water with 20 ppm in it. You know, that's something that could be 8.2, and I could care less of what the pH is because the ability to move that pH down to 6.8 is going to be really easy to do because there's not a lot of mineral content in that water. So it's going to be able to fluctuate really easily. Now, if you have very high ppms in your water, you know, you're 200, 300, 500 ppm in your water, which is getting really high. Now you're in trouble because
Anything over 120 for your alkalinity, you should definitely pH. If it's below that, then, you know, it's probably not going to impact it. You could monitor it over around and see if it moves your pH at all. pH definitely matters for uptake. It's crucial. But what Tad's saying here is that the water with the alkalinity is not, you know, 110, 120. pH at 8.2 is probably not going to do too much to your soil.
Now, the one thing to keep in mind is when you do see a really, really high alkalinity, high ppms in your water, what you want to do is filter that water first and then pH adjust it if you do need to pH adjust it. And sometimes you can take your RO water and mix back in some of your original water as a way of buffering that water and allow you to use less RO because RO is not great for the environment, not great in general, and we don't typically want to water with straight RO. So yeah, and the way I like to think of pH, both in the soil and especially with the water, is yes, can you grow a plant? Because here's the thing, people will be like, oh, my I never check my pH and my plants look amazing, or I have 8.2 water and my plants look amazing, you know. And I say, great, you know, that's awesome. Here's the thing to consider though. If we can make it as easy as possible for a plant to take up nutrients, if we can get that water into a pH range, if we can get that soil into a pH range that's optimal, then the plant can put less energy into trying to extract those nutrients and put that energy into other things like growing cannabinoids and terpenoids and biomass and all the things that we want our plant to be able to do. So in that sense, pH absolutely does matter. And if you really want to say pH doesn't matter, like try applying an acid or a really strong base, or try growing in soil that's, you know, a 4 pH. You can't do it. Like plants they're not used to that. Now, when we just put nutrients into a bucket and make up an online recipe, probably falling into a range that plants can grow in. Is it optimal? Probably not, but it's going to be generally close enough, and organic soil is pretty forgiving to where you can get away with that. So I'm done. That was it.
I would, my answer to this question is I would pH it just because it's going to make it easier on your plant. And then I worry way more about a low pH than a high pH, because a low pH, heavy metals, trace element toxicities, all hell can break loose with, you know, a pH at 5.5. So, you know, if somebody's growing in soil at 7.5, is that above my metric? Yeah. Are we going to advise you to try to bring that down? Yes. Will you probably have a really good run at 7.5? Probably. A run at 5.5 would be disastrous. It would be really bad. So pH does matter. Alkalinity's the real driver. And, you know, definitely if you're hitting 120 on your alkalinity, you should be doing something about it. And I would, pre-filter any kind of water treatments, RO, anything. It all needs physical pre-filters.
I just want to add this comment because I assume most people know this, but if you don't, your dehumidifier will raise your temperature in your room and also lower your humidity at the same time. So it'll work twofold there. Also, if you add a heater, that's going to dry out your air a little bit too. But dehumidifiers and humidifiers are going to be much more efficient. So thanks for pointing that out, Dottie. We should have mentioned that when we were talking about it.
And for home growers, those oil radiators are a lot safer than, the space heaters and stuff we see typically in home grows, which can be dangerous.
All right, I'm going to skip around a little bit here. Any tips on soil structure when starting a new living soil bed from grassroots, I assume fabric pots, so a big fabric bed? Do you prefer a homogeneous or horizontal mix? If horizontal, or horizontal, sorry, he does call it a horizontal mix, Leighton does. What are your preferred layers and their depths? Thank you both. You want to go first, Brandon?
Sure. So typically we like a 10 to 12 inch substrate depth. That's going to make it's going to save you some money. I think the beds are typically 2 feet, but it'll save you some money. But we found that surface to volume ratio, it works better for your irrigation management. So that's one thing. I like homogeneously mixed soil. I think outdoors, talking about horizontal layers makes more sense. Indoors with a narrow 10 to 12 inch depth, I don't think that it does any benefit if you're adding rocks to the bottom of your pot. We can talk about perched water tables, but at the end of the day, you're just making your pot smaller. And then Tad has talked about in the past, having, like, if you're doing seedlings, you might want to do a couple of inches of soil that's, low fertility, and then have, stronger fertility under that. That's something that, if I was direct seeding, that makes sense to me. You could do a seedling mix that doesn't have a lot of pumice and make it easier for the seeds to come out as well. So things like that make sense to me. But, I really think that a homogeneous mix is optimal for optimal uptake and release of fertility. Like, it's really important that we manage that solution, that irrigation volume in the soil as well, because without it, we don't have enough solution, and you'll see a lot of trace element issues start to pop up. Can't figure out what's going on. pH is right. Everything looks good. You water it thoroughly and they go away. And so I'm all about a homogeneous mix. And then as far as soil testing goes, if you have horizontal layers, I have no idea what you would do. It would, you would have to be a reactive grower, I feel like.
You can't really soil test. Yeah, because we were actually consulting with a company, a commercial company up in Canada right now, who is trying to do soil testing, and they had horizontal layers. We made them get rid of them, but they had huge fertility challenges around it. And actually their plants looked way better than their soil test was reflecting, which told us that their soil test probably wasn't accurate. So, I don't know how you would take a good sample out of a horizontal bed with layers. I brought my plant over because I wanted to kind of give you guys a visual. So let's say I take this plant and I fill it with rocks to right here. All I've done is essentially raised my water table. So this isn't increasing my drainage any. What it's doing is now the water is going to come down to here, hit those rocks, and stop. This is called interfacing. It's something it's a property of different media, substrates, and soils. When it hits that, now the force of gravity has to overcome the capillary action of the water in order to work its way down. That's sort of how SIPS works. The capillary action has to overcome the force of gravity to bring the water up. So I think it creates a lot of challenges. That being said, I don't know that there's enough research on soilless media substrates and horizontal layering versus actual soil substrates. But I can't imagine it being positive in that regard. And I just worry that you're not creating an optimal environment for the plants. So yes, even though we have this amazing story of like, oh, well, soils have all these different layers. You know, we have the O layer and A layer, all these different layers in actual soil. And because of that, plants have co-evolved with soil to survive geologically in these environments the best. I just don't think that's a true story. It sounds really nice because it sounds like biomimicry and these things have worked together, but I don't think that's the actuality. I think plants would do better in an environment that was more homogeneous, where they have equal access to nutrients and there's no limiting root space. We don't have any compaction. Like natural soils have a ton of compaction that we have to deal with. They have nutrient issues. They have, hydrology problems. So why would I recreate that in an indoor environment? It just doesn't make sense to me.
And the other side of it is because outdoors is the only place where I can see that it's an option. I think it's kind of an option that may be forced onto farmers because this is one of those things where I feel like cannabis likes to reinvent or at least remarket it's not a wheel now, it's a circle with a hub in the middle. Like we love in cannabis to reinvent the wheel all the time. And in traditional ag, I don't know anybody who's doing traditional ag doing horizontal layers on purpose. I know folks that have to deal with certain horizontal challenges, for their farms and fields and that kind of stuff. So
I will add too, they've done research looking at all the microbes and the biodiversity that exists in agricultural soils versus forest or plains or all these different natural environments, and they found that agricultural soils in general had higher microbial diversity and higher active microbial biomass, and organic soils.
Disturbed soil.
And I guess you could say disturbed soil to a certain extent. I do want to point out that David Bryden is saying that Layton does a homogeneous A horizon in grassroots pots beds. I don't know enough about his program. I'm familiar with Layton. We talked years ago on the phone, but that's the most I know about his style of growing. So you'd have to reach out to him directly, but I also don't want to misconstrue what he's doing or recommending just simply out of my ignorance of the process. So thought I'd share that. And medically minded.
And can I just say one more thing on that? For me, the thing about horizontal, aside from the perched water table and making your pot smaller, because we all know that bigger volume makes organics a lot easier. Plants don't need calcium on Tuesday and phosphorus on Wednesday. They need access. And, that's why hydro used to just, slay everything, is because it was this constant availability. And we've gotten so much better at providing availability to plants and organic systems now. We've been able to catch up quite a bit. But, you don't want to hamstring yourself and impact your final harvest metric because your plant needed to grow through a layer to have access to something. So just another little nuance to that, I guess.
Yeah, and I just want to comment. So this is a different scenario. So yes, if you were trying to increase drainage by putting it underneath the pot, where there is that differentiation, that should help with drainage versus putting it inside the pot. And yeah, if you Google, Dan mentions perched water table. If you Google perched water table and the word containers or container gardening, you will find a ton of research that explains this phenomenon, because it's very counterintuitive. It goes against what your brain wants to think would be happening. So
it's an easy physical experiment to see, and there's a lot of folks who do. They build these boxes. I've got one where it's plexiglass, and you can put clay in the bottom and sand on top. Pour water in, and as you would expect with clay, being more dense, and you'll get a perched water table. Reverse it though, and the same thing happens. You would think with sand, I'm going to get great drainage on the bottom, and you don't. It hits that layer, and when you have two homogeneous layers, you're going to get that capillary versus gravity action and get a perched water table.
It's kind of along the notes of soil biology. So David says he recently built an outdoor in-ground bed for cannabis. They had to completely dig up and excavate. What's a quick and inexpensive way to wake up the soil biology? You want to go first, Brandon?
I would say wait till spring when it warms up, and a compost tea. That would be my thing. I think that you could apply a food source. I think Tad and I both are huge fans of alfalfa as a food source for microbes. So maybe getting some alfalfa in there, but a good aerated compost tea and warmer temperatures.
Yeah, my first thought was you probably did just by digging up the bed, because you added a little bit of oxygen when you did that, and the bacteria will probably reproduce faster. But yes, so I think an aerated compost tea is probably the most inexpensive way of doing that. And if you can't do that, you could do a compost extract where you literally just bucket stir method, put some compost in there, stir it up, and then water it in over the plants. So yeah, that's the easiest and cheapest way. If you want to be a little more targeted with it, you could buy a product like Microbial Mass, or we have one called Plant Probiotics, or I know there's like Growers Recharge. They're all just known microbes that have specific plant benefits to them, and that's something that you could add into. But really, just adding a food source, you probably already have biology in there, or adding more biology and a food source. In the case of aerated compost tea, would kind of give you the best of both worlds. All right. Brandon, I have a pack of seeds from a reputable breeder that germinate slowly and now seem stuck in the seedling stage. It's not my soil or method. I have other seeds in the same pot that are fine. Help.
Okay, awesome question. So Bongri, that's a great name. So I'm assuming that you are direct seeding. If you're saying it's not your soil or your method, but I would want to know how you're popping these seeds initially. I like to soak seeds. There's a scarification is something that you can and should do with old or stubborn seeds. The way we used to do it in the old days, you just take a piece of sandpaper and cut it to the size of a matchbox, and we would throw the seeds in there, and you're sitting around watching
Brandon,
TV, and you just
these are
them.
in the seedling stage already, so they've already popped. He says they're just not. Okay. They're not growing like everything else. It sounds like in the pot.
That's odd, then. Yeah, because once once a seed, every once in a while, you'll see the two cotyledons will get pinched, and if you don't remove that material, they might stall out. You can sometimes soften that by spraying it repeatedly with like a mister, if that's something that's going on. I don't know why some seeds would be, there's always some seeds that are more vigorous than others. Like I just got a bunch of seeds and sent out a bunch of clones recently, right when we had that, brutal cold snap. And those seeds are probably okay. They might germinate a little slowly. If you get seeds that, aren't stored well, they might be less vigorous, but I don't know. I would reach out to the breeder and see if they've had any issues with that particular cultivar or something like that. But if everything popped, I don't know why some in the same pot would be doing better than others, because they would have the exact same fertility, moisture, par, everything like that. So it has to be something with the seed.
Yeah, I think of, like you said, vigor, which is, I think, an important word to consider when we're talking about how fast a plant is growing. The things that I would consider with that is, one, if the other plants are just genetically more vigorous and growing faster, then they may shade out or be getting more light than that one plant, which could cause it to grow slower. Excuse me. You might be over or under watering, or that plant may be more susceptible or sensitive to over or under watering, or to over or under fertilizing. So it could be that the other genetics in there are just more accustomed to the environment that you've provided and are doing better in that environment, or it could be something related to your watering. But yeah, without seeing or knowing more, I think it's really, really hard to tell. I mean, we might be able to look at a picture and just instantly be like, oh, that's what it is. But you kind of have to be a plant detective. And this goes for all situations, any problem like this. You got to really work your way through and think about all the limiting factors for that plant. And I like to think in limiting factors in general in my garden. Like, there's always going to be a limiting factor. Maybe it's my watering, my irrigation. Maybe it's my lights. Maybe it's CO2. Maybe it's my temperature, humidity, or airflow, or maybe it's pest pressure. But that's something to always be thinking about, because you can just keep raising the bar if you're always thinking about what the next limiting factor is for your plant maximizing its genetics. And someone else pointed out that I think is important to say that I think I saw in here is, yeah, some genetics are just going to be slower than others. So that doesn't mean that they're bad genetics necessarily. They could still end up being a really kick-ass plant. If it is an auto,
yeah, and just
that is a little more of an issue.
With, when I say contract the breeder, I don't mean call the breeder and be like, hey, send me some seeds. Talk to the breeder, because most reputable breeders, one, want feedback, and two, probably know that certain genetics are going to move more slowly, and they can just take that worry off your mind. So that's why you should contact the breeder. Autos, if an auto's stalled out, it's like the clock's ticking, tick tock, you're losing harvest as they go slowly. So
I had a comment about this just as a philosophy with beneficial insects. Basically, the idea of, as it was explained to me by Suzanne, when we apply beneficial insects, we're not trying to create a thriving population of them. They are there because they are predators, and they are there to eat whatever target insect is damaging our plants. Once they've eaten those insects, they're going to eat each other, and then they're probably going to die. Like, we're not necessarily trying to create a perfect environment for them to be successful. That being said, there are some insects that you can create banker plants for, or pollen sources if they do feed on pollen, if that's a source for them. Some insects don't have multiple food sources that they can feed on, so you can't do this with all beneficials. And some are a lot easier than others. But in general, the idea is we apply the beneficial insects, they eat the target pest, and then there's not enough target pests for them to eat, and then they expire. Just as a general philosophy to be aware of around beneficials. Anything you want to add, Brandon?
No, I mean, I have always seen, even without adding any, I've always seen really high numbers of beneficial insects in my worm bins. I think it wasn't it strats that used to come in the Oli? You'd open it up and it'd just be crawling.
Rogue beetles was the big one.
Rogues?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but so with worm bins, I feel like I've got Swirsky, I've got Stratiolaelap semitis, and they just showed up, and so I don't know what they're eating. Like Tad said, some beneficials can live on pollen and other sources. So, but yeah, it's really cool. There's nothing wrong with that. It's definitely an advantage to, as you bring in your worm castings, to bringing in other beneficials. So I love that.
All right, we're kind of jumping around on stuff. Shane says, so if turning the lights right down just before chop by a few days, will that speed up the cure by having less chlorophyll to start with, if that makes sense?
Do you mean turning down as in reducing the number of hours, or do you mean turning
I would
down
assume
like
reducing the light. Let's go with reducing light intensity. Let's talk about some things you can do at the end right before harvest. And I will say there is just, to the best of my knowledge, there's not enough research around this. There are some practices that growers seem to do because it seems to work. And a lot of times as growers, we end up getting it right when they research it. 12 hours is the optimal length for most cannabis genetics in terms of a dark cycle. Like these are things we have stumbled into. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I guess this is my caveat for what we share now is what other people might have done and seems to work may not be like optimized as best practice 5 years from now.
Yeah. The most, I recently just saw a paper that showed that you get better, harvest metrics with a full 12 hours as opposed to 10 hours or whatever. I do, last couple of weeks, turn the gas down, drop my temps,
Reduce CO2.
and you can back your light off a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. But I wouldn't turn my light down too much at the finish. I'm more concerned about temperature at that point. But I do know certain people that definitely turn their lights down the last couple of weeks. I don't know if that's to control temperature or if it's the actual par change that is quote unquote giving them better terpene numbers. But there is some research and some study that direction that may be beneficial.
Yeah, maybe by turning down your temperatures, you're reducing the uptake of phosphorus. Maybe you'll get a little more purpling that some people like. Yeah, you can kind of play around with it. I do like to, like in my case, one of the things that Brandon and I discussed is I was getting further in and I was having all these environmental swings and all these changes. It's like, okay, well, let's just back off the gas then. Let's dry out the room even a little further than in the VPD chart. Let's make it, let's see what our dehumidifier can do to dry things out. Let's maybe adjust the lights down. They don't need to be at 1200 ppfd. Maybe they're at 800 ppfd. Let's turn off the CO2 and just kind of, start to senesce the plant. And I think that's a consideration in certain circumstances, depending on how your plant is looking too. That's the whole other thing with harvesting is you really have to judge the plant. Like I might make the argument that this last round, I had just a skosh too much nitrogen in there, maybe. But these are the sorts of things that you kind of have to watch for and say, okay, well, had I not had all these temperature swings and equipment issues with losing power and the humidity spikes and the botrytis, I probably would have gone another few days to a week on this plant because I can, as a home grower, afford to do that because I'm not growing it commercially. And that's kind of the decision. These are the kinds of things that you're thinking about as you're getting closer to harvest, I guess.
And how much did those hiccups impact your nitrate uptake?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you would have finished normally with lower, so and then if the goal here is to speed up the cure, I would definitely let your plants start to dry down. If you're going to harvest on Friday, maybe don't water after Monday kind of scenario. Obviously, I don't know for your room, but just you want to let the plant start drying down a little bit. And then just get as cold a room as you can and as dry a room as you can and get those plants down to those buds down to where they're crispy on the little guard leaves. And then you can buck those, and then that moisture is going to get pulled from the interior of the bud. So you can push the cure pretty hard. You don't have to do low and slow. And in fact, that's not the best protocol. Getting below a certain percentage moisture to where fungal pathogens can't really take hold is what we want to do. And then after that, you can do whatever you want with your cure. But you really need to, I'm trying to get my cure as fast as I can below that percentage moisture to where I can not worry about fungal pathogens.
Yeah, from the research I've seen, and I think this was Dr. Allison Justice too, is you want, and Jeremy Plum also was someone who talked about this in my podcast with him, is you want to reduce the moisture content inside the buds dramatically in the first 24 to 36 hours. So during that time, you want to make sure you're really pulling as much moisture out as you can. And then after that time, that's when you can start talking about that low and slow as everything's getting homogenized and settled. And that's really the best way from a pathogen perspective to keep these spores from spreading and things like that. So, all right, I have 7 more questions pinned and we have 5 minutes. So We're just gonna have to go fast. All right. We'll do a fun one here. Brandon, what dead song do you think your plants like best?
Dark Star, hands down.
All right, that was an easy one. Brandon, have you ever popped seeds in your bed but started the run on a 12-12 cycle?
I have not, but I do that with cuts to sex plants. I'll take cuttings, throw them in a shot glass, and throw them in a tent and just flower them, then without even rooting them. But I have never popped seeds straight on a 12-12.
I have not either.
I think you always want to get your roots established. Roots equal shoots.
All right, Larry asks, how do compost and worm castings differ in terms of a nutrient analysis? What are some things you're looking for on a test for each, and what would be considered too high for chloride and salts? Larry, this is an entire hour question. Very good question, though. I'm going to give you the 30-second answer. Compost and worm castings, in general, earthworm castings tend to be higher quality than compost. That being said, earthworm castings can carry pathogens. They can carry other diseases that would be killed through the thermal composting process. So that's one advantage compost has. Now, in general, though, worm castings have higher nutrient quality, but I've seen shitty worm castings and phenomenal compost and vice versa. In general, if you don't have any nutrient analysis, go with the worm castings. But the things I like to look for, especially with compost, is that C to N ratio, carbon and nitrogen ratio. We want to make sure that that compost is fully composted. We want to make sure that we don't have high levels of ammonia, because that tells me that the nitrogen is still cycling. And so there are some things that you want to look for specifically on a test. Now, in terms of too high of chlorides and salts, that's going to depend on how much you're mixing into your total media. And you can kind of do the ratio for that. If you know, your compost has 200 ppms of chlorides in there, well, then if you mix it in at 20%, then you can just do the math to figure out how much chloride you're adding to your soil and have, you know, to stay below your target. Brandon?
No, that's great. In general, worm castings are more bioactive. There's some real magic that happens inside the gut of the worms. And like Tad said, they are more susceptible, pest, pathogen, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a trade-off. But I mean, we could talk about this for a couple of hours on another one.
Bongri, send us some pictures. Email me some pictures of your plants, because now I'm curious as to what's going on. All right, we have time for one more questions. I see Justin had that ferment question. I'm going to go with this one, though. And Justin, hit us up next week for your question. But how do you feel about worms and springtails? Any specific worms or springtails that you guys use? Do you prefer soils that only have bacteria through powder inoculation, or what's best?
I don't mind springtails at all. You know, super high populations, you might want to reduce your irrigation a little bit. Maybe you're overwatering a little bit. I love red wigglers. The Africans are great too, but in these short beds, I don't think it really matters. They're not going to stratify. And then as I do like to inoculate with trichoderma, with bovaria. You know, those are the only real inoculations that I'm doing on a regular basis.
You're probably getting a lot of biology just from the compost fraction or the earthworm casting fraction that you've added when you were mixing your soil originally, or if your manufacturer was mixing if you buy a soil, for example. In terms of specific worms or springtails, and here's something that Brandon and I actually differ on. I don't ever like to buy worms or add worms, because in my experience, if you have a large enough container and you are watering correctly, those are the two key things there. Large enough container, watering correctly, worms will show up if you use worm castings, at least in our soils. So we have, like, our buddy Justin at Mako. If you look under if you pick up his blue mat soaker hose, you just see earthworm castings all along it, because those worms just love that it's a little moisture right there. And he's never once added worms. And we see this all the time. So the worms, because earthworm castings also contain worm cocoons and eggs and the, little baby worms, they're going to show up in your mix if you're managing it correctly, in my experience. Now, if you want to jumpstart that, yeah, you can add worms, but the only worm you can really buy for the most part is the Acineta fetida. That's the red wiggler, which is more of a composting worm. But again, it's not going to hurt anything other than your pocketbook if you do want to buy and add worms. But then if you're not watering correctly or in your small container, they're probably going to die, and that's a waste of money. So Brandon still likes to add them.
Well, I mean, if you've got good soil, they will show up. I love worms. I love the chelating benefits of worm poop. I love, it really helps with your availability to have worms. So I don't care whether you add them or get them naturally. I just think you should have them.
There you go.
That's a good compromise.
I will say it may take a cycle or two for them to show up if you're just waiting for the natural approach. So you could kickstart it with purchasing them if you wanted to go that route. It's not like it's a huge expense.
But like Tad mentioned earlier, I don't really think of the expense. It's a risk. It's a calculated risk because you could be potentially bringing in something you don't want with those worms. Because Uncle Jim's doesn't, they're not concerned about what's coming with them. They just have to provide a healthy worm, not something that's good for your plant. So.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for a fun hour. We'll do this again next week. I really appreciate all you guys for tuning in. And I got to go get my daughter from preschool. See you guys later.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
everyone.
Take care.